Did you know that one of the most magical movies ever made almost destroyed the actors who starred in it? Who Framed Roger Rabbit from 1988 looks like pure fun and joy when you watch it. But behind the scenes, it was one of the hardest movies Hollywood had ever attempted. Bob Hoskins had to act with characters that weren't there. The animators worked so hard they could barely sleep, and the whole project almost ran out of money. What you see on screen is a masterpiece of creativity and courage. But getting there? It was a wild adventure filled with impossible challenges and brilliant people who refused to give up. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Number 20. Bob Hoskins had to act completely alone in an empty room. When Bob Hoskins stepped onto the set to film scenes with Roger Rabbit, there was nobody there. The invisible character didn't exist yet. All the cartoons were drawn and added later, sometimes months after filming finished. Hoskins had to imagine where Roger was standing, where his eyes would look, and how his body would move. He had to react to a character that was only in his mind. The director would tell him, "Roger just kicked you in the shin," and Bob would grab his leg and jump back in real pain and surprise. It sounds simple, but it's actually one of the hardest things an actor can do. Most actors need another person to bounce off of, to look at, to feel the energy from. But Bob had empty air. He created magic out of nothing. It looked easy, but it required incredible imagination and skill. Number 19. They built a fake. Hollywood to make the cartoon characters look real. The filmmakers didn't just film on existing streets. They built an entire fake Hollywood backlot with streets, buildings, and even fake sidewalks. Why? Because cartoon characters needed special lighting to look like they belonged in the real world. The ground was specially painted and treated so that when the animators drew shadows underneath Roger, they would match the real shadows on the street. The buildings were painted with a certain brightness so the cartoons wouldn't look too bright or too dark next to them. Every tiny detail mattered. The crew spent weeks planning how light would hit the pavement, how shadows would fall, and what colors would make the cartoons feel real. When you watch the movie, Roger looks like he's really there, walking on real streets under real sun. That magic came from planning and obsession with details. What looked like a normal movie set was actually a scientific experiment in light and color. Number 18. The animation process took 3 times longer than expected. The filmmakers thought the animation would take 1 year. It took 3. The team of animators and technicians had to draw every single frame of Roger Rabbit's movement thousands and thousands of times. In the big scenes where cartoons and real actors danced together or fought. Together, every movement had to be perfect. If Roger's arm was in the wrong spot by even a tiny bit, it would look wrong next to Bob Hoskins' real arm. The animators couldn't just speed things up either. Each frame had to be checked multiple times. Sometimes an entire scene would be redrawn because one detail wasn't quite right. The budget grew bigger and bigger. The studio got nervous. But the director Robert Zemeckis refused to rush it. He believed that greatness couldn't be hurried. In the end, the patience paid off. What looked smooth and natural on screen required thousands of hours of painstaking work behind the scenes. Number 17. Bob Hoskins got so confused. He didn't know what was real. By the end of filming, Bob Hoskins had spent so many months acting with invisible characters that his mind started to blur reality and imagination. He would walk onto set and look at empty space where Roger would be. After a while, his brain started to actually see Roger there, even though Roger wasn't drawn yet. Hoskins talked about it in interviews. He said he would sometimes forget that Roger wasn't real. When he looked at the empty spot, his eyes would focus on it like something was actually there. His brain had rewired itself to believe in the invisible rabbit. Other actors on set noticed it too. They would see him staring at nothing and reacting to it with real emotion. It was like watching someone live in 2 worlds at once, the real world and the animated world. His dedication was so complete that the line between real and imaginary disappeared. That wasn't just acting. It was entering another dimension of creativity. Number 16. They used real rabbits to study movement. Before the animators started drawing Roger, they brought real rabbits onto the set. The animators watched how real rabbits moved, hopped, and turned their heads. They studied how a rabbit's ears flopped when it jumped. They watched how a rabbit's nose twitched. They observed how a rabbit's feet touched the ground when it ran. Then they took all that real, natural movement and added cartoon exaggeration to it. Roger moves like a real rabbit would move, but bigger, sillier, and more dramatic. That's why Roger looks alive. He's not just a silly drawing, he's an animal with real physics mixed with cartoon magic. The animators spent weeks just watching rabbits eat, sleep, and play. It sounds like wasted time, but it was the secret ingredient that made Roger feel real. Most audiences never know about those real rabbits. They just see a cartoon character that feels alive and true. Old tools, real animals, created brand new magic. Number 15. The movie was nearly impossible to edit. After all the live-action filming was done, the editors faced an enormous puzzle. They had hours and hours of film with Bob Hoskins and the other actors doing their scenes. But the cartoons hadn't been drawn yet, so the editors had to cut the film based on the timing of invisible characters. Imagine trying to cut a dance scene where you can only see one dancer, but the scene was meant for two dancers. You have to guess where the other dancer would be. You have to time the cuts exactly right so that when the cartoons are added later, everything matches up perfectly. One mistake in timing would mess up the whole scene. The editors worked for months, making frame-by-frame decisions about where Roger would be, how long he would stay on screen, and when he would move. If they got it wrong, the animators would have to start all over again. Getting it right was like solving a massive puzzle with 1,000 pieces, where some of the pieces were invisible. What looked like a simple edit on screen was actually a miracle of planning and precision. Number 14. The studio almost shut down the project. In the middle, halfway through making the movie, the executives at the studio looked at the budget and the timeline and got very scared. The movie was costing far more money than expected. The animation was taking longer than anyone thought possible. Some executives wanted to stop the project completely. They wanted to cut their losses and move on. Robert Zemeckis, the director, had to fight for his vision. He believed in the movie so much that he convinced the studio to keep going, even though it was risky. If the movie had failed, it would have been a disaster for the studio and for everyone who worked on it. But Zemeckis believed that audiences would love it. He was right. But for a few scary weeks, the whole project hung in the balance. One bad decision, and this masterpiece would never have existed. What looked like a smooth creation on screen was actually a story of survival and faith in the impossible. Number 13. They had to invent new technology to make it work. The technology to blend cartoon characters with real actors didn't really exist before this movie. The filmmakers had to invent it. They created special cameras, special lighting rigs, and special painting and drawing techniques that had never been used before. They developed new ways to track movement and timing. They built machines that could hold animation cells in exactly the right position under exactly the right light. The technology company that helped them, Industrial Light and Magic, had to figure out solutions to problems nobody had ever faced. How do you make a cartoon character cast a real shadow? How do you make a cartoon character reflect light like a real object? How do you make a cartoon character move perfectly in sync with a real actor? These weren't simple questions. The filmmakers had to become part scientists and part magicians. By the end, they had created tools and techniques that would influence filmmaking for decades to come. The movie wasn't just an artistic achievement, it was a technological revolution. Number 12. Christopher Lloyd nearly got hurt during one of the scariest scenes. Lloyd played Judge Doom, the evil villain in the movie. In the famous scene where Judge Doom gets flattened and then reinflated, that was actually dangerous. The effects team had to use real machines and real props. There were moments during filming when things almost went wrong. The mechanical press that was supposed to flatten Judge Doom had to be perfectly timed. If it moved even a fraction of a second at the wrong time, it could have actually hurt Christopher Lloyd. Everyone on set held their breath during these scenes. The crew checked and rechecked every measurement. Christopher Lloyd had to trust that the machinery would work exactly as planned. Actors often talk about doing their own stunts being dangerous, but acting with dangerous machines is a different kind of fear. It's not just about falling or getting hit. It's about trusting technology and people you've never worked with before. That wasn't just acting. It was real bravery in front of a real machine. Number 11. The movie was so complex that nobody thought it could be done before Who Framed Roger Rabbit was made. Most Hollywood experts said it was impossible. Studios had tried to mix cartoon characters with real actors before, but it never looked good. The technique was too hard. The technology wasn't good enough. The cost was too high. Many directors and producers gave up on the idea. But Richard Zemeckis believed it could be done, and he found a team crazy enough to try. They were told by so many people that they couldn't do it that it became a kind of fuel. Every expert who said impossible just made them more determined to prove it could be done. The movie industry watched and waited. Would it work? Would it be a disaster? Would it be a revolution? Everyone was shocked when they saw the finished film. Suddenly, mixing cartoon and reality looked easy. But it only looked easy because of hundreds of people working impossibly hard. What seemed impossible became one of the most beloved movies ever made. Number 10. Bob Hoskins only made about half the money other actors made. Bob Hoskins was paid much less than the other big names in the movie. Why? Because when he agreed to do the movie, nobody knew if it would work. The director, Richard Zemeckis, wasn't famous yet. The technology was untested. The whole thing was risky. Other actors might have said no to a risky project, but Bob Hoskins said yes, even though he knew he wouldn't get paid as much as he could have made doing other movies. He believed in the vision. He believed in Richard Zemeckis. He believed in the crazy idea of a cartoon rabbit running around Hollywood. His faith in the project, even when it was risky, was part of what made the movie possible. In the end, the movie became hugely successful. Bob Hoskins' name is remembered forever. Money is forgotten, but being part of something great is remembered forever. His choice to believe in something impossible, even when the payment was low, showed real character. Number 9. The paint job on the sets was incredibly specific. The sets in the movie were painted very carefully. The filmmakers knew that cartoon characters needed to sit in front of colors that would make them look real and bright. If the background was too colorful, the cartoon would get lost. If the background was too dark, the cartoon would look like it was floating. So the paint color, the wall texture, and even the way light bounced off the walls was carefully planned. Artists didn't just paint walls, they created the perfect stage for animation to happen. The streets of Hollywood in the movie are painted in a specific way that makes Roger and Jessica Rabbit look absolutely real when they stand there. When you watch the movie, you don't think about the paint. You just think about how real and alive the cartoon characters look. That's the point. The paint should disappear, but it took enormous planning to make it disappear. Old tools like paint and brushes created brand new magic. Number 8. The rotoscope technology was used in new ways. Rotoscoping is an animation technique where animators trace over real film footage to create cartoons that look exactly like real movements. It's been around since the 1920s, but this movie used rotoscoping in new ways. Animators would trace over the real actors' movements and then exaggerate them to make them look more cartoony and funny. It was like taking real life and turning it into a caricature. A real movement that looks normal becomes a funny, exaggerated cartoon movement. This helped Roger and Jessica Rabbit feel like they were really moving with the actors. Their movements matched real human movement, but they were bigger and sillier. The animators had to find the perfect balance. Too much exaggeration, and they wouldn't look real. Not enough exaggeration, and they wouldn't look like cartoons. It was a tightrope walk between two worlds. Every frame was a choice about how much to exaggerate, how much to keep real. That wasn't just animation. It was art and science mixed together. Number 7. Jessica Rabbit's voice had to be secretly recorded. Jessica Rabbit's voice is one of the most famous cartoon voices in movie history. But here's the weird part. The actress who voiced Jessica, Amy Irving, recorded her voice separately, and sometimes the filmmakers had to record it in secret ways. Since the animation came after the live-action filming, sometimes the animators realized they needed different line readings or different emotional tones. They couldn't always have Amy Irving come back to re-record, so sometimes they had to stretch and manipulate her voice using special technology. Her voice had to match perfectly with the animated lips. If the lips moved but the words didn't match, the whole thing would look wrong and fake. The timing had to be absolutely perfect. Getting one voice actress's voice to match with animated lips that hadn't been drawn yet was like solving a puzzle in reverse. You're working backwards from sound to image instead of the normal way. That wasn't just voice acting, it was a technical miracle disguised as simple dialogue. Number 6. The movie took so long to make that child actors aged out. Some scenes in the movie were filmed years apart. A child actor would film a scene, and then animation on that same scene wouldn't happen for another year or two. By the time the animation was done, the child had grown older and taller. But they couldn't refilm the scene with a taller child. That would mess up the editing and continuity. So sometimes you see a child who looks a certain size in one frame, and then in the very next frame, they might look slightly different because years had passed. Normally, audiences don't notice these tiny inconsistencies. But if you look carefully at some scenes, you can see the strain of time passing. Some of the children who worked on this movie went from being 7 years old to being 9 or 10 by the time the movie came out. That's a huge change in a child's life and appearance. What looked like a seamless movie experience was actually stretched across years of real life happening in between the frames. Real time lived inside the movie. Number 5. The animation supervisor had to memorize every movement. The animation supervisor was responsible for making sure that every frame of animation matched the real actor's movements. This person had to watch the live-action footage hundreds of times. They had to memorize not just what the actors did, but how they did it. The exact speed of a turn, the exact height of a jump, the exact angle of a glance. If Roger Rabbit's hand was supposed to touch Bob Hoskins' shoulder, it had to touch at exactly the right angle, at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right pressure. Being off by even a few frames would make it look wrong. The animation supervisor sat between two worlds, the real world of the filmed actors and the drawn world of the animators. They were the gatekeeper who made sure both worlds matched perfectly. It was exhausting work. It required memory, attention, and an almost superhuman ability to focus on tiny details for months at a time. That wasn't just a job. It was a meditation on perfection. Number 4. The movie accidentally revealed how Hollywood magic works. Before this movie, audiences could imagine that cartoons were somehow alive or magical. They didn't really know how cartoons and real people were combined. But Who Framed Roger Rabbit showed audiences the work behind the magic. The movie itself became a documentary about how movie magic is made. When you watch Bob Hoskins acting with an invisible rabbit, you're learning how movie illusions are created. The movie is entertaining, but it's also educational. It shows audiences that what looks real on screen is made of thousands of small choices by artists and technicians. That realization changes how you watch movies. You start to see the work. You start to appreciate the effort. You realize that movie magic isn't really magic. It's people being incredibly creative and working incredibly hard. In a way, the movie revealed its own secrets, but instead of ruining the magic, it made the magic even more impressive because you understood how hard it was. Old magic tricks lose their power when you know how they work. This magic got stronger. Number 3. The film was almost released in black and white. Early in the production, some executives wanted to save money by filming in black and white instead of color. Black and white would have been cheaper. But Richard Zemeckis refused. He knew that cartoon characters would look more beautiful and more real in color. He fought for color film even though it cost more money. The decision to use color instead of black and white was one of the most important creative choices in the movie's history. In black and white, the movie might have looked artistic, but cold. In color, it looks warm and alive. The reds, the yellows, the blues, the pinks. All those colors make the cartoon characters sing. Imagine Jessica Rabbit in black and white. Her famous red dress would just be a gray shape. Her glamour would disappear. Roger's red shorts and yellow gloves would be gray. The movie would lose its soul. Zemeckis was right to fight for color. One small choice, color instead of black and white, changed the entire feeling of the movie forever. Art is made in small decisions that accumulate into something big. Number 2. The famous Wilshire Boulevard sequences were filmed 3 different times. One of the most exciting parts of the movie is when the characters run down Wilshire Boulevard, being chased by Judge Doom's creations. This sequence looks smooth and exciting when you watch it, but it was actually filmed 3 completely different times. Why? Because the first 2 times, things went wrong. The timing was off. The cartoon characters didn't match the real action correctly. The editing didn't feel right, so they had to stop, assess what went wrong, and try again. The crew had to set up the entire scene again. The actors had to run the same route again. The cameras had to roll again. It's exhausting and expensive to refilm scenes, especially outdoor scenes with lots of people and complicated choreography. But the director knew it wasn't right yet. He refused to accept anything less than perfect. The 3rd time, everything worked. The energy was right. The timing was perfect. The chase felt real and dangerous and exciting. What looked spontaneous on screen was actually the result of 3 attempts, each one teaching the filmmakers what they needed to fix. What looked perfect was built on failure and persistence. Number 1. The movie changed Hollywood forever. When Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out, it changed what directors thought was possible in movies. Suddenly, mixing animation with live action seemed doable. The movie proved that with enough creativity, determination, and money, you could make anything. In the decades after this movie, filmmakers started trying new combinations of animation and real actors. The technology got better and easier, but none of it would have happened without this movie showing the way. The movie also changed how audiences thought about cartoons. Cartoons weren't just for children or just for funny gags. Cartoons could tell serious stories. Cartoons could be part of crime mysteries. Cartoons could make you cry and think and feel. Who Framed Roger Rabbit proved that cartoons deserved respect as art. It opened doors that had been closed before. Every movie that combined animation and live action after this was standing on the shoulders of Robert Zemeckis and his crazy team. The movie didn't just entertain audiences, it changed the trajectory of cinema itself. One small group of people who refused to give up on an impossible dream changed what movies could be forever. Bonus fact: the hidden animation, how they snuck extra cartoons into the background. In many scenes, there are cartoon characters in the background that you'll never see unless you watch very carefully. Animators put secret characters and inside jokes and references into the scenes where most audiences never look. In one scene, you can see a tiny animated character doing something funny if you look at the very edge of the frame. In another scene, there's an animated gag happening in the background while the main action happens in the foreground. The animators did this partly because it was fun, partly because they wanted to reward audiences who watched carefully, and partly because they wanted to prove that animation could be on screen even when nobody was looking at it. These hidden animations took extra time and money, but the filmmakers believed in the magic of putting art in places where most people wouldn't see it. They believed that the beauty of creation mattered, even if only a few people noticed. Years later, audiences discovered these hidden details and shared them online. Suddenly, the movie became even more rewarding to watch. The animators' secret jokes from decades ago made new audiences laugh. One small choice, putting art where nobody would see it, created memories that lasted forever. The past lived again through art. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is more than just a fun movie about a cartoon rabbit solving a crime in Hollywood. It's a story about people who believed in something impossible and refused to give up, even when everyone told them they couldn't do it. It's about how creativity and determination can change the world. It's about how art matters, how work matters, and how sometimes the most beautiful things come from the hardest struggles. Every frame of this movie holds the dreams and sweat of hundreds of people who worked beyond exhaustion to create something magical. They proved that the impossible is just the possible waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed these stories and learned something new about this classic movie, please subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time. Thank you for watching,